They told her that stammering made her unfit for critical communications, that her speech impediment was a liability in life or death situations. But when Corporal Maya Chen spoke into that radio headset during the darkest hour of Operation Desert Shield, her voice became the beacon that guided 200 trapped soldiers through a minefield to safety, proving that some people confuse surface flaws with deep strength. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the first time I heard Maya stutter during roll call at Fort Meridian. It was a crisp October morning in 2003, and Sergeant First Class Rodriguez was conducting the daily briefing for the 47th Communications Battalion. When he called her name, Maya stood at attention, her small frame barely filling out her desert camouflage uniform, and attempted to respond with the standard acknowledgment. Corporal Chen, present for duty, Sergeant, she managed her face flushing crimson as several soldiers exchanged glances. The stutter wasn't severe, but in a military environment where clear, precise communication could mean the difference between life and death, it stood out like a neon sign in the darkness. Rodriguez, a 20-year veteran with more patience than most, simply nodded and moved on, but I caught the subtle eye rolls from some of the other communications specialists. Maya noticed them too. Her shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly, and she fixed her gaze straight ahead with the kind of rigid focus that comes from years of practice at hiding embarrassment. The communications center at Fort Meridian buzzed with the constant chatter of multiple radio frequencies, satellite uplinks, and encrypted channels that connected our desert outpost to command centers across 3 continents. It was a symphony of voices coordinating supply runs, medical evacuations, intelligence briefings, and tactical operations that kept thousands of soldiers alive and mission-ready in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. Maya worked the night shift in what we called the quiet corner, handling routine administrative traffic and equipment maintenance logs. Her station consisted of older radio equipment that dealt primarily with supply requests, weather updates, and non-critical communications that didn't require the split-second timing demanded by combat operations. The assignment wasn't accidental. Command had determined that her speech impediment made her unsuitable for high-priority communications where clarity and speed were paramount. I was assigned to the primary tactical communications array, handling real-time battlefield coordination and emergency frequencies. From my position, I could observe Maya's work habits during the overlapping hours of our shifts. She approached every task with methodical precision that bordered on obsessive. Her equipment was always spotless, her logs were updated to the minute, and she maintained radio protocols with a dedication that seemed almost excessive for someone handling routine traffic. What struck me most was how Maya transformed when she thought no one was listening. During equipment tests and system checks, when she was essentially talking to machines rather than people, her voice flowed with remarkable clarity. The stutter that plagued her during face-to-face interactions virtually disappeared when she was focused on technical procedures. But the moment another human voice responded on the channel, the hesitation would return, creating a cycle of self-consciousness that seemed to reinforce itself. Maya's living quarters reflected the same attention to detail she brought to her professional duties. Her bunk area was organized with military precision that exceeded regulation requirements. Every personal item had its designated place. Her uniform was pressed to parade standards despite being assigned to overnight duties, and she maintained a small collection of technical manuals that she studied during off hours with the intensity of someone preparing for advanced certification exams. The other soldiers in our unit had developed various theories about Maya's background. Some assumed she was the product of family military tradition, pushed into service by parents who expected their children to serve regardless of their suitability for military life. Others speculated that she was working through college debt. and viewed her enlistment as a temporary inconvenience to be endured until she could return to civilian pursuits. But Maya offered no clarification about her motivations or background. She responded to direct questions with minimal answers, deflected attempts at casual conversation, and generally maintained the kind of professional distance that made her colleagues comfortable dismissing her as someone who was simply marking time until her enlistment ended. Her personnel file contained standard information about basic training performance and technical school completion, but lacked the details that usually filled out a soldier's story. During mess hall conversations, Maya sat alone or with whoever happened to be nearby, eating efficiently while listening to discussions about home, families, and post-military plans. She never volunteered information about her own circumstances, never complained about assignments or conditions, and seemed content to remain invisible among soldiers who were eager to share their opinions about everything from military leadership to Middle Eastern politics. Sergeant Rodriguez had assigned me to provide Maya with additional training on emergency communication protocols, partly because my station handled the systems she might need to operate if personnel became unavailable during crisis situations. Our training sessions revealed capabilities that didn't match her apparent limitations. Maya demonstrated encyclopedic knowledge of radio frequency management, understood signal propagation theories that weren't covered in basic communications training, and showed familiarity with encryption protocols that exceeded her security clearance level. Her technical competence was remarkable, but her speech impediment became more pronounced when practicing emergency procedures that required rapid verbal communication. During simulated crisis scenarios, Maya could execute complex technical operations flawlessly while struggling to deliver clear verbal reports about her actions. The disconnect between her obvious understanding and her communication difficulties created a professional assessment that categorized her as technically proficient but unsuitable for high-stress communications roles. Maya's off-duty activities were as mysterious as her background. While other soldiers gathered in recreation areas to play cards, watch movies, or engage in the kind of social bonding that builds unit cohesion, Maya disappeared into activities that remained private. She was occasionally seen in the base library studying materials that weren't related to her current duties, walking the perimeter during evening hours when most personnel were relaxing, or working out in the gym during off-peak times when she could exercise without social interaction. Her physical fitness scores were consistently above average despite her small stature, suggesting training regimens that went beyond standard military requirements. During group PT sessions, Maya performed exercises with efficiency that indicated experience with conditioning programs designed for specialized operations. She never struggled with endurance activities, maintained excellent form during technical exercises, and demonstrated coordination that seemed inconsistent with someone assigned to routine communications duties. The communications equipment Maya maintained showed wear patterns that were unusual for devices used primarily for administrative traffic. Her radio sets displayed the kind of fine-tuning adjustments that suggested experience with operations requiring optimal performance under adverse conditions. She understood antenna configurations, signal boosting techniques, and frequency management strategies that weren't typically necessary for routine communications, but would be critical during emergency operations or in environments with heavy electronic interference. Maya's work schedule brought her into contact with communications traffic that revealed glimpses of operations occurring beyond the routine activities visible to most base personnel. Her security clearance allowed access to administrative channels that carried logistical information about troop movements, equipment transfers, and operational planning that painted pictures of military activities extending far beyond what appeared in standard briefings. During quiet night shifts, Maya monitored background communications traffic with attention that seemed excessive for someone responsible only for routine message handling. She maintained logs that included details about signal strength variations, frequency usage patterns, and communication timing that went far beyond administrative requirements. Her documentation revealed understanding of how seemingly routine information could indicate significant operational developments when analyzed by someone who understood what to look for. The base communications center operated around the clock, with different teams handling various aspects of the complex network that kept military operations functioning across multiple time zones and geographical regions. Maya's night shift position placed her at the intersection of traffic flows that carried information from operations occurring during daylight hours in other parts of the world. Her unique scheduling allowed her to observe communication patterns that weren't visible to personnel working standard day shifts. Maya's interaction with visiting communications specialists revealed knowledge that consistently surprised people who expected routine competence from someone assigned to administrative duties. When technical representatives arrived to upgrade equipment or troubleshoot complex problems, Maya asked questions that demonstrated understanding of advanced concepts and offered suggestions that reflected experience with situations that shouldn't have been part of her background. Her speech impediment seemed to diminish when discussing technical subjects, as if her passion for the work helped her overcome the anxiety that triggered her stuttering during routine social interactions. During these conversations, Maya displayed confidence and expertise that contrasted sharply with her usual reserved demeanor, suggesting capabilities that were being suppressed rather than developed through her current assignment. The other members of our communications team had begun treating Maya's presence as routine background, acknowledging her competence while dismissing her potential for advancement or increased responsibility. Her stutter had become a defining characteristic that overshadowed her obvious technical skills, creating assumptions about her limitations that prevented recognition of her actual capabilities. Maya's personal equipment included items that raised questions among observant colleagues. Her personal radio scanner was configured to monitor frequencies that weren't typically accessible to communications personnel at her level. She possessed technical manuals that covered systems not deployed at our base, and maintained reference materials that suggested preparation for operations, involving equipment and protocols that exceeded standard communications training. During base exercises and training scenarios, Maya's performance consistently exceeded expectations for someone assigned to routine duties. She demonstrated ability to maintain communications under simulated adverse conditions, showed familiarity with backup systems and emergency procedures, and displayed calm efficiency during chaotic situations that tested the limits of more experienced personnel. The disconnect between Maya's apparent limitations and her actual capabilities was becoming increasingly obvious to those who worked closely with her. Her stutter remained a barrier to advancement in roles requiring verbal communication, but her technical expertise and operational understanding suggested potential that was being wasted through assignments that didn't challenge her abilities or utilize her knowledge effectively. As winter settled over Fort Meridian and our Communications Battalion prepared for what command described as routine operational readiness exercises, Maya continued her methodical approach to duties that most soldiers would consider monotonous. But those of us who'd begun paying attention to details others missed were starting to recognize that Maya Chen was preparing for something that went far beyond handling administrative radio traffic. Her nightly ritual of equipment checks, frequency monitoring, and system optimization suggested someone maintaining readiness for situations that would require capabilities possessed by very few communication specialists. The stutter that had defined others' perception of her limitations was beginning to seem irrelevant compared to the technical mastery she demonstrated when she thought no one was evaluating her performance. What none of us realized was that Maya's speech impediment wasn't a limitation preventing her from fulfilling her potential. It was camouflage that allowed her to maintain operational security while preparing for the moment when her true capabilities would be needed to save lives that hung in the balance of clear, precise communication under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The morning would come when Maya's voice would prove that stammering doesn't diminish strength, that surface imperfections often hide extraordinary abilities, and that the quietest soldiers sometimes possess the loudest courage when everything depends on their willingness to speak up and guide others home through the darkness. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb arrived at Fort Meridian in January with the kind of swagger that announces itself before he even entered a room. Fresh from a prestigious assignment at the Pentagon's Communications Directorate, Webb carried himself with the confidence of someone who believed his credentials automatically made him the most qualified person in any technical discussion. His uniform bore ribbons from administrative assignments that looked impressive to civilians, but meant little to soldiers who'd actually served in combat zones. Webb's first encounter with Maya occurred during a routine equipment inspection that he'd scheduled to demonstrate his authority over the communications section. As he examined Maya's workstation with theatrical attention to detail, he made comments clearly intended for the assembled personnel rather than genuine assessment of her performance. "Interesting approach to frequency calibration," Webb announced, his voice carrying across the communications center. "Though I'm not sure why someone handling basic administrative traffic would need such precise adjustments. Perhaps we should focus on mastering fundamental procedures before attempting advanced configurations." Maya responded with the same professional neutrality she maintained during all interactions, but I noticed her fingers tightening around her equipment manual. Her voice carried only the slightest stutter as she explained her calibration methods. But Webb seized on the hesitation with the enthusiasm of someone who'd found exactly what he was looking for. "Communication clarity is absolutely critical in military operations," Webb continued, his tone suggesting he was delivering profound wisdom rather than stating the obvious. "When lives depend on clear verbal transmission, we cannot afford to have personnel whose speech patterns might compromise mission effectiveness. Standards exist for valid reasons." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The assembled soldiers shifted uncomfortably as Webb's meaning became unmistakable. He was using Maya's stutter as justification for questioning not just her current performance, but her suitability for any communications role that involved verbal interaction. Maya maintained her composure, but her jawline tightened almost imperceptibly. Over the following weeks, Webb's campaign against Maya intensified with calculated precision. He assigned her to equipment maintenance duties during peak operational hours, ensuring she missed briefings about new technologies and procedural updates that might have enhanced her professional development. Maya found herself cleaning antenna arrays in desert heat that reached dangerous levels, updating supply inventories that had been completed the previous day, and performing redundant system checks that served no operational purpose beyond demonstrating her irrelevance to actual communications missions. Webb's approach was more sophisticated than simple harassment. He positioned his actions as professional development, claiming that Maya needed to master basic responsibilities before advancing to more complex assignments. His documentation carefully avoided explicit criticism while creating a paper trail that suggested performance concerns based on communication difficulties rather than personal animus. During staff meetings, Webb would highlight Maya's speech impediment in ways that seemed professionally concerned rather than personally vindictive. He referenced studies about communication effectiveness under stress, cited military standards for verbal clarity, and generally created an atmosphere where Maya's stutter became viewed as a fundamental barrier to advancement rather than a manageable characteristic. Maya endured these attacks with the same quiet dignity she brought to everything else, but observant colleagues began noticing subtle changes in her behavior. Her equipment maintenance became even more obsessively thorough, as if she was channeling frustration into supernatural attention to technical details. Her off-duty activities became more solitary, and she spent increasing amounts of time in the communications center during hours when most personnel were elsewhere. Specialist Jennifer Torres, a communications technician who worked the evening shift that overlapped with Maya's night duties, had begun documenting Webb's treatment with growing concern. Torres possessed the kind of street-smart intelligence that came from growing up in neighborhoods where survival required recognizing when authority figures were abusing their power for personal satisfaction. "Something's not right about this," Torres confided to me during a maintenance break. "Webb talks about communication standards, but Maya knows more about radio theory than half the people in this unit. Yesterday, she solved a frequency interference problem that had our senior technicians stumped for 3 days. She did it in about 10 minutes, then went back to cleaning equipment like nothing happened." Torres had started paying closer attention to Maya's work methods, and what she observed didn't match Webb's narrative about limited capabilities. Maya's understanding of signal propagation seemed almost supernatural. She could predict equipment failures before diagnostic systems detected problems, and her modifications to standard procedures consistently improved performance metrics in ways that shouldn't have been possible without extensive experience in optimization techniques. My own observations of Maya's capabilities had been growing more detailed as Webb's persecution intensified. During late-night equipment tests when the communication center was relatively quiet, Maya's technical conversations revealed knowledge that seemed impossible given her apparent service record. She understood classified encryption protocols, spoke knowledgeably about jamming countermeasures, and demonstrated familiarity with communication systems that weren't supposed to be operational at our base. Most intriguingly, Maya's speech patterns changed dramatically when she focused on technical subjects. The stutter that plagued her during routine social interactions virtually disappeared when she discussed radio theory, frequency management, or troubleshooting procedures. During these conversations, her voice carried confidence and authority that suggested extensive experience with high-level communications operations. Webb had begun scheduling Maya for duties that conflicted with training opportunities and professional development activities that might have advanced her career. When specialized communications courses were offered to base personnel, Maya found herself assigned to inventory duties that prevented attendance. When visiting technical experts conducted equipment demonstrations, Maya was sent to perform antenna maintenance that kept her away from learning opportunities. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to examine it objectively, but Webb's position as senior communications supervisor gave him discretionary authority over duty assignments that was difficult to challenge through normal channels. Maya's speech impediment provided convenient justification for decisions that appeared professionally motivated rather than personally vindictive. Torres and I had begun comparing notes about discrepancies in Maya's background that didn't add up when examined carefully. Her technical knowledge consistently exceeded what should have been possible, given her apparent training record. Her understanding of operational procedures suggested experience with communications missions that weren't part of standard military service. Most puzzling were her references to equipment configurations and protocols that seemed more advanced than anything currently deployed. During one particularly brutal day when Webb had assigned Maya to clean every piece of equipment in the communication center twice, Torres discovered something that raised new questions about Maya's background. While organizing technical manuals that Maya had been using for reference, Torres found notations written in Maya's handwriting that referenced operational scenarios involving hundreds of soldiers, complex coordination requirements, and communication. Challenges that seemed far beyond routine military exercises. The margins of Maya's technical manuals contained calculations related to signal strength requirements for long-range communications, antenna positioning for optimal coverage in mountainous terrain, and frequency management for coordinating multiple units operating in electronic warfare environments. These weren't theoretical exercises from training courses. but practical notes that suggested experience with real-world applications under demanding conditions. Torres shared her discoveries with Master Sergeant Patricia Morrison, a communications veteran whose 22 years of service had taught her to recognize when personnel records didn't tell complete stories. Morrison had been observing Webb's treatment of Maya with growing discomfort, but Torres's findings prompted her to conduct her own investigation using her security clearance and network of contacts throughout the communications community. Morrison's inquiries revealed gaps in Maya's service record that became more significant when examined by someone who understood how military personnel documentation worked. Maya's training certifications included qualifications for equipment that wasn't officially deployed at Fort Meridian. Her medical records contained references to specialized examinations that weren't part of standard processing for communications personnel. Most intriguingly, her security clearance had been updated through channels that Morrison couldn't access, suggesting involvement in operations above her apparent classification level. Webb's confidence in his campaign against Maya had grown to the point where he began making public comments about her limitations. During briefings attended by personnel from other units, his remarks carried the subtle implication that allowing soldiers with speech impediments to serve in communications roles represented declining military standards that compromised operational effectiveness. Clear communication saves lives, Webb announced during one multi-unit briefing, his words obviously directed at Maya's situation. When we lower standards to accommodate personal limitations, we put entire missions at risk. Military service requires difficult decisions about individual capabilities versus collective security. Maya sat through these presentations without visible reaction, but personnel who knew what to look for could see the subtle signs of someone exercising enormous self-control. Her breathing became more controlled, her posture more rigid, and her hands would trace barely perceptible patterns against her uniform that seemed to provide some kind of internal anchoring mechanism. Morrison had expanded her investigation to include personnel at other bases who might have encountered Maya during previous assignments or training programs. The responses she received were carefully worded, but consistently suggested that Maya's reputation extended beyond her current role at Fort Meridian. Former colleagues described her technical expertise in terms that didn't match someone assigned to routine administrative communications. One contact at Fort Gordon, where Maya had completed advanced technical training, provided information that raised new questions about her background. Maya Chen was one of the most technically gifted students we'd seen in years, the instructor explained during a secure phone conversation. Her understanding of complex systems was almost intuitive. We recommended her for specialized programs that require security clearances above standard communications training. The instructor's comments suggested that Maya's current assignment represented underutilization of capabilities that had been recognized during her advanced training. Her speech impediment had apparently been noted, but not considered disqualifying for programs that emphasized technical expertise over verbal communication skills. Torres had begun documenting Webb's treatment of Maya with the methodical attention of someone building a case for formal complaint. Her files contained dates, times, witnesses, and specific examples of assignments that seemed designed for harassment rather than legitimate operational requirements. The pattern showed systematic effort to isolate Maya from professional development opportunities while creating documentation that could justify negative performance evaluations. Maya's response to Webb's persecution revealed character traits that impressed the growing number of personnel who were paying attention to her situation. She never complained, never sought sympathy, and never allowed personal frustrations to affect her professional performance. If anything, the harassment seemed to strengthen her resolve to excel at whatever duties she was assigned, no matter how menial or redundant they might be. During equipment maintenance assignments that Webb clearly intended as punishment, Maya discovered and corrected problems that had gone unnoticed by routine inspections. Her cleaning procedures were so thorough that equipment performance improved measurably after her attention. Even the most tedious administrative tasks were completed with precision that exceeded requirements and revealed discrepancies in supply records that resulted in significant cost savings for the unit. Morrison's investigation had reached the point where further inquiries required authorization from command levels above Webb's authority. Her requests for information about Maya's background had been acknowledged but not answered, creating response patterns that suggested involvement in operations that remained actively classified. The network of personnel who'd begun questioning Maya's treatment found themselves facing a common realization that extended beyond simple workplace harassment. They were dealing with someone whose actual capabilities remained hidden beneath carefully maintained operational security, and Webb's persecution represented not just personal cruelty, but potential waste of military assets that might be needed for purposes they weren't authorized to understand. Torres discovered that Maya's work schedules consistently placed her in positions to monitor communications traffic that carried information about operations extending far beyond routine base activities. Her night shift duties provided access to message traffic from units operating in different time zones, and her administrative responsibilities included handling logistics communications that painted pictures of military activities occurring across multiple geographic regions. Maya's technical modifications to communications equipment had resulted in performance improvements that exceeded manufacturer specifications without violating warranty requirements or safety protocols. Her adjustments were so subtle that they escaped notice during routine inspections, but measurable improvements in signal quality and system reliability suggested knowledge of optimization techniques that weren't covered in standard training programs. Morrison had begun reviewing Webb's service record with the same attention to detail she'd applied to Maya's background. What she discovered was a career pattern focused on avoiding challenging assignments while seeking positions that offered advancement opportunities without operational risks. Webb's combat experience was non-existent despite multiple opportunities for deployment to active theaters, and his technical certifications were limited to basic requirements without progression toward advanced specializations. As winter progressed toward spring at Fort Meridian, the tension between Webb's campaign against Maya and the growing recognition of her hidden capabilities was building toward confrontation that would reveal exactly how wrong assumptions about limitations could be when applied to someone whose true potential remained concealed beneath surface characteristics that obscured extraordinary abilities. Maya continued her methodical approach to duties that Webb intended as degradation, but her performance was beginning to attract attention from personnel whose authority exceeded his ability to suppress recognition of exceptional competence disguised as routine compliance with military standards that failed to measure what really mattered when lives depended on technical excellence delivered under pressure that would break soldiers who mistook quiet strength for exploitable weakness. The investigation into Maya's background was approaching revelations that would transform Webb's harassment campaign into evidence of professional incompetence that threatened to expose his fundamental inability to recognize genuine military assets when they operated beneath notice of officers whose qualifications consisted primarily of administrative credentials, rather than operational experience that taught the difference between apparent limitations and concealed capabilities, waiting for the right moment to save lives through performance that exceeded everyone's expectations except those who understood what they were really observing. The emergency klaxon pierced the pre-dawn silence at Fort Meridian with the kind of urgency that transforms sleeping soldiers into combat-ready personnel within seconds. It was March 15th, 0347 hours, when Colonel Sarah Martinez's voice crackled through the base-wide communication system with news that would change everything we thought we knew about Maya Chen. All personnel to emergency stations. We have a Code Red situation developing in Sector 7. Multiple units require immediate evacuation assistance. This is not a drill. The communications center erupted into controlled chaos as technicians rushed to their stations, establishing contact with field units and coordinating emergency response protocols. Webb, roused from his quarters, arrived at the center with the disheveled appearance of someone unprepared for crisis management, barking orders that revealed his lack of experience with actual emergency operations. Maya had been monitoring routine overnight traffic when the emergency began unfolding. From her position at what Webb dismissively called the administrative corner, she was perfectly positioned to observe the developing crisis through multiple communication channels that painted a picture of catastrophic proportions. What started as a routine patrol mission had deteriorated into a nightmare scenario that would test every aspect of our unit's capabilities. Captain Davis, commanding officer of Bravo Company, reported his position through static-filled transmissions that carried the unmistakable sound of incoming artillery. His unit of 200 soldiers had been conducting reconnaissance operations in mountainous terrain when enemy forces launched a coordinated attack that cut off their primary evacuation routes. Worse, intelligence reports indicated that the entire area had been seeded with mines that made standard extraction procedures impossible. Base, this is Bravo 6. Davis's voice fought through electronic interference that made standard communication protocols nearly useless. We are surrounded and taking heavy fire. Primary extraction point is compromised. We have wounded and need immediate guidance for alternative routes. Enemy forces have superior positioning and are using electronic warfare to disrupt our communications. Webb attempted to coordinate the response using standard procedures that quickly proved inadequate for the complexity of the situation. The mountainous terrain created communication shadows that prevented reliable contact with the trapped unit. Electronic jamming from enemy forces degraded signal quality to the point where critical information was being lost or misunderstood. Most critically, the unit's position placed them in the middle of a minefield that required precise navigation guidance to avoid casualties that could quickly escalate into total disaster. As Webb struggled with communication difficulties that exceeded his training and experience, Maya sat at her workstation making adjustments to her equipment that seemed routine but were actually optimizing her systems for conditions that would challenge the most advanced communications technology. Her fingers moved across controls with supernatural precision, fine-tuning frequencies and signal strength in ways that suggested extensive experience with operations under extreme electronic warfare conditions. Torres, monitoring the crisis from her position, noticed that Maya's modifications were improving reception quality for transmissions from the trapped unit. While other stations struggled with static and interference, Maya's equipment was beginning to achieve clearer contact with Bravo Company. Her technical adjustments were so subtle that Webb, focused on his failing command performance, didn't notice that someone in his administrative corner was solving problems that stumped his primary communications specialists. Base, Bravo 6. We have multiple casualties and dwindling ammunition, Captain Davis reported, his transmission barely audible through the interference. We need extraction coordinates that avoid the minefield, but our GPS systems are being jammed. Without precise guidance, any movement risks triggering explosives that could kill dozens of soldiers. Webb's response revealed the limitations of his theoretical knowledge when confronted with real-world crisis management. He attempted to relay standard extraction procedures that didn't account for the electronic warfare environment or the minefield complications. His instructions were technically correct, but operationally useless for soldiers facing immediate threats that required innovative solutions rather than textbook responses. Morrison watched Webb's failing leadership with growing alarm as she realized that 200 soldiers were depending on communications support from someone whose qualifications, consisted primarily of administrative credentials rather than operational experience. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and conventional communication methods were proven inadequate for the complexity of challenges facing the trapped unit. Maya's equipment modifications had achieved remarkable improvement in signal quality, but she remained at her assigned station, maintaining the professional restraint that had characterized her response to months of harassment. Her technical solutions were available to help save lives, but military protocol required authorization from Webb before she could assume primary communication responsibilities for the emergency operation. Colonel Martinez arrived at the communications center as Webb's coordination efforts reached the point of near total failure. Her assessment of the situation was immediate and devastating. The trapped unit was running out of time. Communication difficulties were preventing effective coordination, and leadership was proving inadequate for the crisis demands that required capabilities exceeding normal training parameters. Staff Sergeant Webb, Martinez said, her voice carrying authority that cut through the chaos. "What's your assessment of communication quality with the trapped unit?" Webb's response revealed his desperation as he attempted to deflect responsibility for his failing performance. "The electronic warfare environment is beyond our equipment capabilities, Colonel. The interference levels exceed what our systems were designed to handle. Standard protocols aren't sufficient for these conditions." Martinez turned toward Maya's workstation, where her modified equipment was achieving signal quality that exceeded anything else in the communications center. "Corporal Chen, what's your assessment of communication possibilities?" Maya's response demonstrated the transformation that Torres and Morrison had observed during technical discussions. Her stutter virtually disappeared as she focused on operational requirements that transcended personal anxiety about verbal communication. "Colonel, with proper frequency management and signal amplification, reliable contact is achievable. The enemy jamming follows predictable patterns that can be countered through adaptive techniques." Webb attempted to maintain his authority by emphasizing Maya's supposed limitations. "Colonel, Corporal Chen has communication difficulties that make her unsuitable for critical operations. Her speech impediment could compromise coordination with the trapped unit during life or death situations." Maya's response was delivered with clarity that made Webb's objections seem not just wrong, but criminally negligent. "Permission to establish primary communication link with Bravo Company, Colonel. I can guide them through the minefield using precision coordinates and real-time navigation assistance." Martinez faced a command decision that would determine whether 200 soldiers lived or died, based on her willingness to trust someone whose capabilities had been systematically suppressed by subordinate leadership that confused surface characteristics with operational competence. Her choice would reveal whether institutional bias or mission effectiveness took priority when lives hung in the balance. "Corporal Chen, you have primary communication authority for this operation," Martinez announced, her words transforming Maya from harassed administrative personnel into the primary lifeline for soldiers facing immediate destruction. "Staff Sergeant Webb, you will provide technical support as directed by Corporal Chen." Maya's transformation was immediate and stunning. She adjusted her headset, fine-tuned her equipment with movements that revealed extensive experience with high-stress communications, and established contact with Captain Davis using voice projection techniques that cut through interference like precision surgical instruments. "Bravo 6, this is Desert Angel," Maya said, using a call sign that seemed to materialize from operational experience that exceeded her apparent background. "I have clear communication and am prepared to guide your unit through safe extraction routes. Confirm your current position and casualty status." The clarity and authority in Maya's voice created immediate confidence among the trapped soldiers, who had been struggling with garbled transmissions and uncertain guidance. Captain Davis responded with coordinates and tactical information that Maya processed with supernatural efficiency. creating mental maps of terrain and threat positions that suggested extensive experience with navigation support under combat conditions. Bravo 6, Desert Angel. I'm uploading precise coordinates to your GPS backup systems. Maya continued, her fingers dancing across controls that configured complex data streams in real time. The minefield has gaps that allow safe passage, but timing and positioning must be exact. Are you prepared for step-by-step navigation guidance? Maya's technical expertise revealed itself as she coordinated multiple communication channels simultaneously, maintaining contact with the trapped unit while accessing satellite reconnaissance data, artillery support coordinates, and medical evacuation protocols that required security clearances above her apparent authorization level. Her multitasking capabilities exceeded anything Webb had demonstrated during routine operations, much less crisis management. The first group of soldiers began moving under Maya's guidance, following her precise instructions through terrain that required navigation accuracy measured in inches rather than feet. Her voice remained calm and clear despite the pressure of knowing that communication errors could trigger mines that would kill soldiers who were trusting her expertise with their lives. Team Alpha, stop. Enemy patrol approaching from your 2 o'clock position, Maya warned, her monitoring of multiple intelligence feeds providing real-time threat assessment that kept the soldiers hidden until danger passed. Remain stationary for 90 seconds, then continue on bearing 127 degrees for exactly 43 meters. Torres watched Maya's performance with amazement that grew with each successful coordination sequence. The woman who had been dismissed as unsuitable for critical communications was demonstrating capabilities that exceeded senior specialists with years of operational experience. Her speech impediment had vanished completely, replaced by voice control that projected confidence and authority across radio frequencies that carried her words to soldiers whose survival depended on trusting her guidance. Morrison realized she was witnessing the revelation of someone whose background extended far beyond routine military service. Maya's coordination techniques, her understanding of complex tactical situations, and her ability to process multiple information streams simultaneously suggested training and experience that belonged to specialization programs she wasn't authorized to know existed. Maya continued guiding soldiers through the minefield with precision that seemed almost supernatural. Her instructions were delivered with timing that accounted for terrain variations, weather conditions, and enemy movement patterns that required comprehensive understanding of factors affecting navigation accuracy under extreme pressure. Each group of soldiers moved under her guidance while she simultaneously coordinated with artillery support, medical teams, and extraction helicopters. That would complete the rescue operation. Team Bravo, you have wounded soldier requiring immediate attention. Maya observed through thermal imaging data that she accessed through systems Webb didn't know existed. Medical team is standing by at extraction point Charlie. Current route will deliver wounded personnel to medical attention within 12 minutes if movement continues at present pace. Webb stood beside Maya's workstation in stunned silence as he watched someone he'd systematically harassed demonstrate operational competence that exceeded his own capabilities by margins that defied measurement. Every assumption he'd made about her limitations was being demolished by performance that revealed the magnitude of his professional incompetence and personal cruelty. Maya's coordination reached crescendo as she managed the simultaneous movement of multiple soldier groups through different sections of the minefield while maintaining communication with extraction teams, medical personnel, and command elements. That required coordination precision measured in seconds. Her voice remained steady and clear despite managing information flows that would overwhelm normal communications specialists. All teams, this is Desert Angel, Maya announced as the final group of soldiers cleared the minefield under her guidance. You are clear of immediate danger. Extraction helicopters will arrive at designated coordinates in 7 minutes. Medical teams are prepared for wounded personnel. Mission success confirmed. The Communications Center erupted in celebration as confirmation arrived that all 200 soldiers had been successfully extracted without casualties from mine explosions. Maya's guidance had achieved what seemed impossible, navigating an entire unit through deadly terrain, while under enemy fire and electronic warfare conditions that defeated conventional communication methods. Colonel Martinez approached Maya's workstation where she was completing operational reports with the same methodical precision she brought to routine administrative duties. But Maya's transformation had revealed capabilities that changed everything about how her colleagues understood both her background and Webb's systematic persecution of operational assets, disguised as administrative personnel. "Corporal Chen," Martinez said, her voice carrying respect that acknowledged extraordinary performance under conditions that tested human limits. "That was exceptional work. How long have you been qualified for precision navigation coordination under combat conditions?" Maya's response revealed the background that had remained hidden beneath carefully maintained operational security. "Desert Angel was my call sign during Operation Iron Shield, Colonel. I coordinated navigation support for special operations units operating in denied territory for 18 months before my cover assignment to Fort Meridian." The revelation struck the Communications Center like lightning as personnel realized they'd been witnessing systematic harassment of someone whose qualifications exceeded anything in their understanding of military specialization programs. Maya wasn't just another communications specialist struggling with speech impediments. She was operational personnel whose expertise had saved hundreds of lives during missions that remained classified above normal security clearances. Torres felt her investigation suddenly make sense as she understood that Maya's mysterious technical knowledge, her advanced equipment modifications, and her encyclopedic understanding of complex systems reflected experience with operations that officially didn't exist. Her speech impediment hadn't prevented her from serving in critical roles. It had provided perfect camouflage for someone whose true identity needed protection from enemies who would consider her capture a significant intelligence victory. Morrison realized that her inquiries about Maya's background had triggered security protocols because her requests had touched on operations involving personnel whose identities were protected at classification levels that required special authorization, even to acknowledge their existence. Maya's assignment to Fort Meridian wasn't punishment for communication difficulties. It was protective placement designed to provide recovery time while maintaining readiness for missions that might require her unique capabilities. Webb's persecution campaign was revealed as sustained attack on national security assets that he'd been too incompetent to recognize. His harassment hadn't just been personally cruel. It had been inadvertent sabotage of military capabilities that might have been needed for operations where failure could result in strategic consequences, extending far beyond individual soldier casualties. Staff Sergeant Webb, Colonel Martinez, said, her voice carrying implications that would end his military career. "Your treatment of Corporal Chen has constituted systematic harassment of classified personnel, whose operational value exceeds your security clearance to understand. You are relieved of supervisory duties pending investigation." Maya returned to her equipment maintenance duties with the same quiet professionalism she'd maintained throughout months of harassment, but everything about how her colleagues perceived her capabilities had been transformed by performance that revealed the difference between apparent limitations and concealed excellence, waiting for the right moment to save lives through courage disguised as routine competence. The rescue of 200 soldiers through Maya's navigation guidance became legendary throughout Fort Meridian as proof that assumptions about human limitations often reflect the observer's constraints rather than the observed person's actual capabilities. Maya's stutter hadn't prevented her from coordinating the most complex rescue operation in the base's history. It had hidden extraordinary abilities, until the moment when lives depended on her willingness to speak with voice that carried soldiers through darkness toward safety that existed only because someone refused to let surface imperfections define their potential for greatness. When everything depended on performance that exceeded everyone's expectations, except those who understood what they were really witnessing. 3 months later, Maya received promotion to sergeant and assignment to positions that utilized her specialized capabilities while providing the recognition that had been systematically denied through leadership that confused authority with competence. Her story became required reading for communications personnel as proof that excellence often operates beneath notice of those whose qualifications consist primarily of credentials rather than operational experience that teaches the difference between perceived weakness and concealed strength, waiting for opportunities to demonstrate that quiet voices sometimes carry the most powerful truths about what humans can achieve when mission requirements transcend personal limitations that exist only in minds too small to recognize genuine capability. When it appears in forms that challenge conventional expectations about who possesses the courage to guide others home through dangers that would defeat soldiers who mistake surface characteristics for fundamental limitations. 6 months after the rescue operation that saved 200 soldiers, Maya Chen stood before a gathering of senior military officials at the Pentagon's Advanced Communications Center, delivering a presentation that would reshape how the military approached personnel assessment and capability recognition. Her voice, clear and confident, carried across the briefing room without a trace of the stutter that had once defined how others perceived her limitations. Traditional evaluation methods focus on surface characteristics while missing operational potential that exists beneath apparent weaknesses. Maya explained to an audience that included generals whose decisions affected military policy at the highest levels. My experience demonstrates that speech impediments, when properly understood, can actually enhance certain communication capabilities rather than limiting them. The presentation revealed research Maya had conducted during her recovery period following the rescue mission. Her analysis showed that personnel with communication challenges often developed enhanced listening skills, technical precision, and stress management techniques that proved valuable during crisis situations. Rather than viewing speech difficulties as disqualifying factors, military leadership could leverage these characteristics as indicators of potential excellence in specialized roles. General Patricia Hawkins, Director of Military Personnel Development, had been following Maya's case since the rescue operation brought her capabilities to high-level attention. The systematic harassment Maya endured at Fort Meridian had exposed flaws in personnel management systems that allowed qualified individuals to be marginalized based on superficial assessments rather than comprehensive evaluation of their actual abilities. Sergeant Chen's experience illustrates institutional blind spots that cost us operational effectiveness. General Hawkins explained during a closed-door meeting with defense officials whose authorization was required to implement policy changes. We're wasting human resources by allowing bias to override objective assessment of capabilities that could prove critical during emergency operations. Maya's new assignment placed her in charge of developing communication protocols for special operations units operating in electronic warfare environments. Her work involved creating systems that could maintain reliable contact under conditions that defeated conventional technology, drawing on techniques she'd perfected during missions that remained classified but had proven essential for operations requiring precision coordination under extreme pressure. The training programs Maya developed emphasized technical excellence over verbal presentation skills, recognizing that communication effectiveness involved multiple factors beyond speech clarity. Her curricula identified personnel whose backgrounds suggested hidden capabilities that might prove valuable for specialized assignments requiring unconventional approaches to complex problems. Torres promoted to staff sergeant following her role in documenting Webb's harassment campaign. became Maya's primary assistant in developing personnel assessment methods that looked beyond surface characteristics to identify operational potential that existing evaluation systems missed. Their collaboration produced screening techniques that discovered exceptional capabilities among soldiers who had been overlooked or marginalized by conventional selection processes. Maya taught me that assumptions about limitations often say more about the observer than the person being evaluated. Torres reflected during an interview for a military leadership publication. Her rescue coordination proved that stammering doesn't prevent someone from guiding others through life or death situations with precision that saves lives. Morrison, now serving as Senior Communications Advisor at the Pentagon, implemented Maya's recommendations across multiple military installations, creating evaluation protocols that identified technical expertise and operational potential among personnel whose capabilities had been underestimated based on communication style, physical characteristics, or other factors that proved irrelevant to actual job performance. The soldiers Maya guided through the minefield during the rescue operation became living testimonials to the effectiveness of her communication methods. Captain Davis, whose unit had been trapped in what seemed like an impossible situation, requested Maya's expertise for subsequent operations requiring navigation support in challenging environments. Desert Angel's voice cut through chaos like a beacon. Davis explained during the commendation ceremony, honoring Maya's contribution to the rescue mission. Her guidance was so precise and confident that we never doubted we would make it home safely. She transformed what could have been a catastrophic loss into a successful extraction that brought everyone home. The specialized equipment Maya developed for high-stress communications became standard issue for units operating in electronic warfare environments. Her modifications improved signal clarity and system reliability while maintaining compatibility with existing technology, proving that innovation often emerged from personnel whose backgrounds provided unique perspectives on operational challenges. Maya's personal transformation reflected the professional recognition that acknowledged her true capabilities rather than focusing on characteristics that had been misinterpreted as limitations. Her confidence grew as assignments challenged her expertise rather than marginalizing her potential, demonstrating that human development flourished when institutional support matched individual capabilities with appropriate opportunities. Investigation into Webb's harassment revealed systematic problems with leadership evaluation and supervisory authority that extended far beyond Maya's specific case. Military justice proceedings resulted in policy changes designed to prevent qualified personnel from being marginalized by supervisors whose own limitations prevented recognition of subordinates' actual capabilities. Webb's military career ended with discharge under circumstances that reflected his professional incompetence and abuse of authority. His case became a cautionary example used in leadership training programs to illustrate how personal bias and limited understanding could result in waste of military assets and potential compromise of mission effectiveness. Colonel Martinez, recognizing that Maya's expertise represented capabilities that could benefit military operations globally, recommended her for positions requiring the highest security clearances and most challenging technical assignments. Maya's career trajectory shifted from defensive survival against harassment to proactive contribution at levels where her specialized knowledge could influence operations, affecting national security. The Communications Center at Fort Meridian was redesigned according to principles Maya developed during her analysis of operational effectiveness under crisis conditions. The new layout optimized equipment positioning, workflow patterns, and personnel coordination methods that improved response times and communication quality during emergency operations. Maya's research into stress management techniques for communications personnel revealed that individuals who had overcome personal challenges often possessed enhanced resilience and problem-solving abilities that proved valuable during high-pressure situations. Her findings contributed to selection criteria that identified personnel whose background suggested capacity for exceptional performance under conditions that challenged normal human limitations. Young soldiers entering communications training. Program studied Maya's rescue coordination as an example of technical excellence, combined with personal courage that achieved mission success under circumstances that would have defeated conventional approaches. Her story illustrated that military effectiveness depended on recognizing and developing human potential, rather than dismissing capabilities based on superficial characteristics. The Desert Angel call sign became synonymous with precision navigation, support and emergency communication, coordination throughout the military communications community. Personnel requesting specialized assistance for operations requiring exceptional technical expertise, specifically requested support from units trained according to Maya's protocols and methods. Maya's legacy extended beyond her individual achievements to encompass systematic changes in how military organizations evaluated personnel, assigned duties, and developed capabilities that might prove essential during crisis situations. Her experience proved that institutional improvement required willingness to challenge assumptions about human limitations and recognize excellence wherever it appeared. The facility where Maya now worked operated at classification levels that required special authorization even to acknowledge its existence. But her contributions to national security continued the pattern established during her rescue coordination. At Fort Meridian, technical problems that challenged conventional solutions found resolution through approaches that reflected her unique combination of specialized knowledge and operational experience. Maya's personal life reflected the same transformation that characterized her professional development. She married another communications specialist who understood that her capabilities extended far beyond what appeared on standard personnel evaluations, and their partnership produced innovations in military technology that enhanced operational effectiveness for units requiring exceptional communication support. The children Maya and her husband raised grew up understanding that human potential often exceeded surface appearances, and that individual excellence could emerge from backgrounds that challenged conventional expectations about capability and achievement. Their family represented proof that personal characteristics once viewed as limitations could become sources of strength when properly understood and appropriately supported. Military installations worldwide implemented training programs based on Maya's research, creating evaluation methods that identified operational potential among personnel whose capabilities had been overlooked by traditional assessment techniques. Her influence extended throughout the defense establishment as proof that institutional effectiveness improved when human resources were developed rather than dismissed based on incomplete understanding of individual potential. Maya's story became required reading at the military academies, teaching future officers that leadership excellence required recognizing capabilities that existed beneath surface characteristics and creating environments where exceptional potential could flourish, rather than being suppressed by narrow definitions of suitability for military service. The communication techniques Maya developed during her classified operations continued influencing military technology development, with her innovations becoming incorporated into systems that supported operations requiring precision coordination under conditions that challenged the limits of human endurance and technological capability. Maya Chen had proven that voices once dismissed as inadequate could guide others through darkness toward safety, that apparent weaknesses might conceal extraordinary strengths, and that true military excellence emerged when institutional wisdom recognized that human potential often exceeded conventional expectations about what individuals could achieve when given opportunities to demonstrate capabilities that had been waiting for the right moment to save lives through courage that transcended surface limitations. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.